Hello and welcome to the channel. So my name is Samuel Barless, and on this channel we talk about computer networking and cybersecurity. The first things first, I want to make sure that you know that opinions expressed in this video are my own and not necessarily reflect the opinions of my past, current, or future employers. So in this video we're going to be talking about endpoint security, and hopefully I'll give you some insight into what the different flavors of endpoint security do, what the differences are, and which one will really work for your environment that you're in. So the first thing I want to do when I talk about these is I want to talk about how does it detect and prevent malware, right? Because that's the end of the day. We can't say antivirus. Really, we're talking about malware. Malware includes viruses. It could also include other things that are malicious. Really, anything with malicious intent is considered malware. So a traditional AV, we're really talking about signature and scanning. Some traditional AVs may kind of take away the scanning component and make it more of an active AV. I've seen some of that where maybe it scans newly downloaded files and stuff like that. That's kind of like the next step for traditional AV. But generally, what we're really focused on here is that it's signature based. So what this means is that your threat intelligence is extremely important. The other thing that I want to warn you about traditional AV here, because we're signature based and threat intelligence is so important, we have to understand where that threat intelligence is coming from. Because if we have outdated threat intelligence is weeks, months, maybe even years old, it's not getting updated on a regular basis with what we're seeing in the industry, that is very, very dangerous. A lot of these traditional AV companies, they're going to purchase their threat intelligence from other people. Now that's important because the people that they purchase it from may not be giving the entirety of their threat intelligence away, right? Because that threat intelligence is very valuable to the organizations that spend the time and resources to gather that threat intelligence. So maybe there'll be a delay on that threat intelligence, or maybe there will be some things removed from that threat intelligence. So we really want to be careful who we're picking from a traditional AV standpoint, mostly focused on that threat intelligence key case there. Now moving on to next gen AV. So really when we're talking about next gen AV, we're moving to more of a heuristic or behavioral analysis. So sometimes we do also possible signatures. Now I've looked at some AV, next gen AV products that say we don't need signatures. We do everything behavior based. Signatures are the way of the past. We don't need those anymore. And other ones say, yeah, we really focus on our behavioral analysis. That's our number one. But we also use signatures just in case for some reason we know 100% that's bad. We can do that a little bit more efficiently with our signatures than we can with behavioral analysis. So we're going to go ahead and kind of augment that behavioral analysis a little bit. I'm not necessarily 100% against either way, but making sure that when we're talking about behavioral analysis, we have good AI and machine learning. Because if you say, well, we do behavioral analysis, and our behavioral analysis goes, is it a known malware, right? It's not very useful, right? So depending on how the behavioral analysis works and the level of the quality of that product and really that security team that develops and maintains that product is really, really important here. So we want to make sure that our AI/ML that we're dealing with is advanced and is going to actually have a lot of actual positives and not a lot of false positives. Because when we start talking about poorly made AI and machine learning, you may have false negatives, which means, okay, well, that was actually a virus, but we thought it wasn't, or false positives, which means it was totally fine, it was a normal application, but we blocked it anyway, and now we have an irritated user, whether that's you, whether that's an employee of the company you work for, or something like that. Then we kind of move over to EDR here, where we're going to keep that same behavioral heuristic, and we're probably going to include signatures. I'm not going to put probably on there, but probably we're also going to have signatures as well. So we're taking all the qualities of next-gen AV, we're putting them into EDR. We're going to add a little bit more on top of that. So one of the other things we're going to do here is event chaining. So really when we're talking about event chaining, we're talking about maybe you launch a Word application and that launches a PowerShell session. Now that's typically nasty behavior. We don't like that. We can actually go and see all that maybe in a graphical interface from our EDR platform that is going to show us that progression, right? Okay, well, first they used command prompt to launch this, that launched that, that launched that. A lot of times when we're looking at attacks, there's more than one application that's launched, maybe multiple kind of command prompts and PowerShells and that sort of thing are launched to go and generate that attack so that they can bypass things like those signature-based AVs. The other thing here we want to talk about is post-execution. So when you're talking about next-gen AV and traditional AV, typically we're talking about before the infection, right? We have to catch it before the infection. Once you're infected, traditional and next-gen AV kind of fall off, right? If they got past traditional AV, it's over, right? You just have signature scanning, and if it didn't pick it up in the known bad signatures, then oh well, you're just done. So EDR, you can have a lot of post-execution prevention. So we can talk about maybe locking down applications. Maybe we're noticing kind of weird behavior. We can prevent access to the file system to prevent them from encrypting. Maybe it's a ransomware or something like that. And we have some other types of post-execution, depending on your vendor, that you can be talking about. A lot of times there's also other things like integration with your firewall to go ahead and block IPs, maybe integration with a NAC solution so you can go and isolate a device. Sometimes when we're talking about XDR, you can even go and detect stuff happening on a non-EDR system, right? Like an IoT device, maybe on a firewall, and use that threat intelligence that you're gathering to go ahead and take an action maybe on NAC or something like that. Because if it doesn't have an EDR client on it, then you're not going to be able to isolate it with EDR, obviously. And we'll talk about the difference between EDR, MDR, and XDR in a minute here. But I want to kind of go over a few things holistically here. So we're talking about quality. Quality here, I would say that traditional AV is good. Some people are going to go, oh, no, it's not good. It's bad. Traditional AV is better than no AV. And I'd really like to say that if you're at home and you don't have any sort of endpoint security, really look at maybe some traditional AVs. Some of them are actually free, and they may not be the best, but it'll actually get you started, and there's something on there. Now you can also activate Windows Defender. I used to hate Windows Defender; it drove me nuts. They made some huge improvements, and I've seen some really good things from Windows Defender relatively lately. Next gen here, we're talking about this is really better. So we really start looking at some serious antivirus, anti-malware with next gen AV, and then of course EDR is going to be kind of your best of breed over here. We're going to be talking about EDR is going to be kind of more for your large enterprises. And I'm going to go backwards. In terms of who this is for, typically EDR is going to be for large businesses, or let's just say critical. And I'm going to use that kind of in two different fashions. So critical in terms of uptime. So maybe you're like, we need everything to be working as much as possible. EDR is going to help you achieve that goal because it's going to prevent more, it's going to contain more, it's going to keep your systems on longer and for more time because it's better AV. The other way critical we want to talk about is in terms of data. So if you're dealing with very expensive intellectual property, if you're dealing with medical data, maybe things that are very highly regulated, if you go and get a breach, there might be a whole lot of regulations that require you to report these things, and now you have customers that aren't confident in you anymore and stuff like that. So depending on your use case, typically large businesses want to talk about EDR, but also businesses that have very critical data or very critical systems may look at EDR as well. Next gen AV, really talking about small to medium business, right? That's kind of the market here. Maybe EDR is great, right? It's a great solution. Maybe it's a little bit too expensive for what they're protecting. So maybe they're going to just look at next gen AV because they want good, right? They want better antivirus, they want better anti-malware. Traditional really isn't for the business space, so they're going to go with next gen AV because it's a more cost-effective solution for them. They don't necessarily always need the best. And then here, really, we're talking about home users, generally speaking. Now, if you have a really small business, maybe some nonprofits and stuff, you may look at traditional AV because maybe you have a very, very tight budget. But really, I would highly recommend you look at least at next gen AV, something that's going to provide you the behavioral analysis and at least a few little things to kind of give you the edge on some of those kind of medium threats that aren't going to be the kind of the advanced persistent threats we're dealing with over here in EDR, but maybe someone a little more advanced in some phishing and some script kiddie stuff. So when it comes to threat intelligence, it's extremely important here. I'm just going to put TI for threat intelligence. Extremely important in traditional AV, so make sure that whoever is you're looking at traditional AV from has really good threat intelligence. Usually you want to look for places that have internal threat intelligence, divisions, and not necessarily relying on third parties. There are some nonprofits and stuff that help with some of that sharing, but keep in mind, again, that's not going to be everything. It's not going to be as quickly as possible. So really, that's super important. You want to make sure that you have a quality vendor if you're looking at traditional AV. Similar with next-gen AV, right? Again, we talked about how important the AI and machine learning is. You may also have signatures, which again, that threat intelligence has come into play. Now, that's kind of important here, but not super important. But EDR, threat intelligence, actually gets super important because what we're talking about here is not only dealing with that behavioral analysis, we're doing that event chaining, but to do all of this, we need to make sure we have quality threat intelligence so that when we do that event chaining, that we're seeing, hey, this is a malicious application, this is a malicious event chain, right? We start training our AI. Did I not write AI? I didn't write the word AI over there. We're training our AI and machine learning algorithms based on good quality threat intelligence. Super important. So if we're not using good quality threat intelligence, we may have a lot of false positives, false negatives. We may have a very poor security posture for what we're paying for here. So we want to make sure that our threat intelligence is really good here with EDR, MDR, or XDR. Now, moving on to the difference between EDR, MDR, and XDR. Really, EDR is the core product here, so we're talking about endpoint detection and response, whereas MDR is going to be a service. So MDR is where you have managed EDR, essentially. And you could have an MSSP, maybe an MSP, provide you that service, as well as some vendors do offer it in-house. Excuse me. You can go and get MDR directly from the vendor, the manufacturer of the EDR product. XDR is where we start bringing in external threat intelligence from your own network. So maybe that's a SIEM solution. Maybe you're directly connecting firewalls and other things into your EDR platform. So we're not only seeing the data from your endpoints, we're also seeing the data from the rest of your network. That can be very powerful, and that's where EDR really shines, especially when you get into those larger enterprises. Again, you're heavily reliant on that AI, machine learning, and threat intelligence that you're getting out of your XDR vendor. So it's really important that you evaluate what kind of threat intelligence that you are getting. Are they just buying it from someone else? Are they doing it in-house? How reliable is it? Some of the things you can check, you can go and check some third-party testing where they're going through and running through all these different threats that we're seeing in the environment, and look at the detection. But don't only look at the detect rate. There's some other things you want to consider here. So the first thing you want to do, obviously, is, well, did they detect the malware? Did they block it, right? That's number one. The two is, how did they do that? Okay. So we want to make sure that this behavioral analysis is really good, because that's the important part. Everybody knows the old signatures, right? Everybody knows these old signatures. That threat intelligence is really going to come into play kind of secondary. We want to rely on our behavior as much as possible, because if the behavior is good, then the signatures on top of it will be nice extra. But if we're heavily reliant on signatures, we don't really know how good that behavioral analysis is. So we want to make sure that we're using that behavioral analysis to detect these threats, and hopefully we can actually see kind of both, but a lot of times those numbers aren't really put out there. It's really just, did they detect it through signatures or behavioral? It didn't say if, hey, well, both detected them. I haven't seen any off the top of my head. If you see something that I didn't see, let me know about it. That'd be super cool to know. The other thing here is when we're talking about XDR, again, those integrations are super important. So, do they integrate with other products? Do you have to use their SIEM product? Do you have to use their this product, that product, or can you integrate with third parties? That's something you can look at. Maybe looking at a vendor that you already have existing equipment from. You may be looking at adding XDR because the integration is honestly a lot of times it's better with the vendor that you're looking at already integrating with. Or maybe it's a conversation of, well, do I want to make sure that I get the best in terms of the average of the two products, maybe firewall, SIM, and EDR or XDR, the average of all those products, who has the best total package together? Maybe I have a firewall that I'm very happy with. Maybe I have a firewall I'm not happy with. And then we can evaluate the other vendors that are out there from a holistic perspective, and not just look at one product necessarily, but how do they all cohesively work together to give us the best security posture that we can possibly have. And of course, cost is also always a factor with your business, right? We're not going to buy $1 million safe to protect a $100 bill, right? So keep that in mind as well. Depending on your business size, again, next gen AV for the smaller businesses may be good enough. But EDR, XDR, or MDR, of course, if you want kind of that best of breed. The other thing I want to mention, typically EDR and XDR, you have dedicated security teams, multiple people. If you don't have that, maybe you only have one, maybe you don't have any security people, it's just the IT team. Really, I would highly recommend looking at MDR and looking for some way to augment your staff. Whether you can do something like SOC as a service, you can do a full MSSP that's going to provide a lot more than just MDR for you. Maybe they'll also do managed SIM, maybe they'll also do managed firewalls, stuff like that. You can just look at that and make a determination that's best for your organization. So with that, that's my simple, basic endpoint security overview. Hopefully that helped you get a grasp on what the different kinds of endpoint security are that are out there and what maybe fits best for your home, maybe looking at traditional AV, maybe what fits best for your business, maybe next gen or EDR. So with that, thank you for viewing, and I hope to see you again in some more of my videos. See you next time.